Continuing our look at Season 3 of Star Trek The Original Series, I bring you an episode that was always a guilty pleasure of mine. That is, until I found out about all the behind-the-scenes nonsense that would end up propelling this episode straight down to almost the bottom of my own TOS list. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information on any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're taking a look at the Star Trek The Original Series episode, The Mark of Gideon, to better understand its place in Star Trek history. The Mark of Gideon was originally written by none other than Stanley Adams. Why does that name sound familiar to you, you ask? Well, that's because Adams played Cyrano Jones in the Season 2 episode The Trouble with Tribbles. During the filming of that fan-favorite episode, Adams struck up a conversation with Gene Roddenberry about overpopulation and how Star Trek would be perfect to tackle that issue. Gene, being Gene, then simply told Adams if he had a story to write it, as who better to get any message across than the person who is actually passionate about it, and so Adams began to write the episode. Adams' original story, titled No Place to Die, was quite different than the one we actually got, however. Originally, the Enterprise was to arrive at planet Gideon to pick up their ambassador, who petitioned the Gideons for admission into the Federation. Once there, they meet the ambassador, who had recently lost his hand in an accident, and Dr. McCoy is amazed that the ambassador's hand seems to be regenerating right before their eyes. McCoy then asks Kirk if the Enterprise could stay in orbit for a bit to study this revolutionary phenomena, and Kirk agrees, even going so far as to beam 6 Gideons to the Enterprise for scientific study. Once there, however, the 6 men take over the transporter room and begin to beam an army on board the ship, and are successful in taking over the Enterprise. Forced to beam down to the planet, Kirk, Spock, and some of the other senior officers are shocked by the admission of the ambassador that the entire petition for the Federation membership was a ruse to lure the starship to Gideon, but that the Gideons intend no harm to come to the Enterprise crew. Because they had become aware of the Prime Directive, knowing the Federation would not help with their problem, the Gideon Society had sought to enact a self-help plan. You see, Gideon is an overpopulated planet with no viruses, no germs, and not even death. Any injury a Gideon receives simply repairs itself, and life goes on. The intent of the Gideon Council is to infuse human and Gideon DNA to create what they term a morality syndrome, to finally allow for death to occur on their planet, reducing its overpopulation. And since there are no doctors or medical persons on Gideon, McCoy is forced to oversee the entire project. After meeting a beautiful female of Gideon named O'Donna, Kirk becomes her infused partner, and she eventually develops a sickness, forcing Kirk to decide between letting her die, which would allow the Enterprise and her crew to leave the planet, or helping her to survive, which would mean a lengthy and continued stay for the starship and crew. The weight of this decision, though, is short-lived, as Kirk himself suddenly begins to glow, displaying the exact same symptoms as O'Donna has. What follows is Kirk arguing with the Gideon Council, while Spock and Scotty trick the Gideons into beaming them aboard the Enterprise, and they single-handedly retake the starship from the Gideon skeleton crew. Kirk orders Spock to leave orbit and head to a starbase for help, but Spock refuses, relieving Kirk of command and demanding the return of the Enterprise crew. Eventually, McCoy injects the ambassador with a hypo of the virus, and knowing he will surely die, the ambassador lets loose the full extent of his plan to Kirk, that the Council and its family would remain immune to the virus to ensure their own survival, while the rest of the planet would be infected, and those that survived would basically become slaves for the Council. With this information out, Kirk is able to convince the Gideon guards to turn to his side, and when the ambassador passes out, Kirk is able to beam them aboard the Enterprise and begin treating everyone for the virus. and once complete, the Enterprise makes her way out of orbit, heading to the nearest starbase with the Ambassador and a fully recovered O'Donna, who is now a guest of the Federation. As you can see, this story bears little resemblance to the episode proper. Adams was aghast when he saw the episode, but not entirely surprised. He says, "Well, you know, when you write for TV, there's an old expression, take the money and run, so I don't know exactly what I was expecting to happen here." The exact reason for the extensive rewrite is unknown, but having researched so many episodes, I'd have to say it was again due to the budgetary constraints of Season 3, as the episode could no longer afford the special effects or the armies required for the episode. And I would bet that once George Salvin, who rewrote the episode, began to tug at the strings of this story, suddenly everything began to fall apart, forcing a complete rewrite. It's truly unfortunate, however, that this story was not done in its original form, as clearly it would have been a much stronger episode with a much stronger message. A little bit of Trek trivia for you all here occurs when Kirk attempts to contact anyone on the Enterprise. One of the shots, an empty corridor, was actually recycled footage from the episode Is There in Truth No Beauty, done to save the episode money, as Season 3 was notorious for penny pinching every which way they could. Sharon Acker would come aboard the starship as O'Donna for this episode, and like most actors for the show, would have an extensive acting career, though mostly playing bit roles or guest star positions. One thing of note, however, is that she was a Canadian actress, and I think she did my country proud in this episode. I can't really fault her acting abilities in the Mark of Gideon, as it isn't her fault that the story simply didn't live up to its message. David Hurst would join the cast as Ambassador Hoden. Hurst had a very interesting life. Having fled Germany as a child to Northern Ireland, Hurst would become part of the Kinder Transport program initiated by the British government, which saved over 10,000 German Jewish children from the Nazis. Hurst's acting career wasn't as extensive, at least in television, as that of Acker, though he does have 65 acting credits to his name. In the 1990s, he would return to Germany, where he would live out the rest of his life after retiring from acting in the year 2000. David Hurst died on September 15, 2019, after having a stroke while suffering from pneumonia. Another little bit of Trek trivia for you all here is in regards to the seemingly disembodied Gideon crowd seen all throughout the episode. If you look closely, you can actually see frequent background performer William Blackburn, who, in more recent years, has given his personal film reels, which he often took on set, to Star Trek to save for posterity. Blackburn's film reels have offered fandom a behind-the-scenes look into Star Trek that we could only have dreamed of. Judd Taylor would direct this episode. Taylor himself started as an actor, then turned to directing, which eventually garnered him several Emmy nominations for his outstanding directing and producing work. He was also the former president and vice president of the Directors Guild of America. In total, Taylor directed 5 Season 3 episodes: The Paradise Syndrome, Wink of an Eye, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, The Cloudminders, and of course this episode, The Mark of Gideon. He'd also go on to direct the bridge scenes for the episode Whom Gods Destroy. Judd Taylor died on August 6, 2008 after battling a long, unspecified illness. He was 76 years of age. From the get-go, reception for this episode was pretty mixed, most of fandom rating it as mediocre at best. And as fandom often does, people really began to pick apart this episode. One fan writes, "An episode that starts out spooky and tense, but collapse well before the end under a mass of plot holes. Leaving aside how the people of Gideon built such an exact replica of the Enterprise that even Kirk is fooled, there's just no reason for them to build it in the first place. And if Kirk's so infectious, why is he allowed to beam down to the planet in the first place?" Recently, as you good trinaries might have noticed, I've been focusing on Season 3 of TOS. Why? Well, because it's a season I often overlook, like so many other Star Trek fans. And until we get new Star Trek filling me up once again with excitement for adventure, I figured Season 3 was a pretty good alternative. Maybe I'd gain a new appreciation for this often criticized season. But in the case of the Mark of Gideon, researching the episode ended up having the opposite effect for me. I always enjoyed this episode as a kid, probably watching it about 5 times in my lifetime, and so I decided to make this video, and I was truly excited about it. Then I discovered the original story outline, and suddenly, when forced to compare the two, I was left cold. And like a hater of new Trek, suddenly my eyes saw everything wrong in the episode, which kind of defeated my point in making this video in the first place. But true to who I am, I decided to present the behind-the-scenes information to you all, and have you make your own decision on the episode. And whether you're like me, once loving this episode, or if you simply hated it to begin with, I'm interested in your views. But despite how we personally feel, it should be noted that this episode did in fact attempt to deal with the problem of overpopulation and birth control, a worthy message and topic for Star Trek to tackle. And perhaps this attempt to do so is the sole reason the Mark of Gideon has earned its place in Star Trek history. I don't know, you tell me.
Is anyone aboard?
All bridge personnel report immediately. Engineering. Mr. Scott?
Captain Kirk?
Captain Kirk was transported down.
He never arrived.
Who are you?
If you didn't bring me here...
That's right. Who has brought you here?
I request permission to beam down to conduct the search for our captain.
Permission denied.
You're gonna let him get away with that?
This would be madness.
Transport me down right this minute and I'll prove to those...
You know, I cannot accept the responsibility for ordering a fellow officer to violate a Starfleet directive. I can make such a decision only for myself.
You come to die.
I don't know. I only know I'm happy.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrack. What do you think of the Mark of Gideon? Would you rate it as a mediocre episode of Season 3 of Star Trek the Original Series? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel learn more about birth control in the 23rd century? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.